We all know the blessing over bread, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Most of us will probably be saying that around the dinner table later this evening. The blessing thanks God, Hamotzi, the one who takes out, lechem, bread, min haaretz, from the ground. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. He takes out bread from the ground. This kind of fits the pattern of other blessings for food. On apples and oranges, we say, borei pri ha'etz, he creates the fruit of the tree. And on potatoes and carrots, we say, borei pri ha'adama, who creates the fruit of the earth. There is something a little bit weird about the blessing over bread. I mean, apples and oranges grow on trees, potatoes and carrots grow out of the earth, but bread doesn't come out of the ground. Wheat, or barley, or oats, or spelt, or rye, they grow out of the ground. You may have heard me remark on this in the past. Making bread is pretty intensive labor, human labor. God gave us the raw material, the grain that grows out of the ground, but the blessing doesn't thank God for the grain. We need to plant the grain, harvest it, thresh it, grind it into flour, mix it into dough, and then bake it. God even tells Adam, when he kicks Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, by the sweat of your brow you'll have bread to eat. It's not exactly the same as picking an apple off a tree. It's going to be a lot of work. So why does the blessing thank God for bringing bread out of the ground? According to one midrash, one rabbinic interpretation, bread did grow out of the ground in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. That is, in the ideal mythical past, Adam and Eve did not have to do any cooking or any baking or any other work, imagine that, to eat a sumptuous meal. It was like going to this big fancy restaurant and God was the executive chef, the chief executive chef, and you have a big meal laid out for you on a table. Alas, upon eating that forbidden fruit, they were expelled from the garden, and that's why God says to Adam, from now on, by the sweat of your brow, you'll have bread to eat. But in the garden, bread came ready baked. According to another opinion, in Olam Haba, the world to come, that is the messianic time of the future, the bread will again bring forth bread ready baked. In that ideal future world. Unfortunately, we live in this world, the real world. And we have to work to earn a living so that we can put bread on the table. Of course, for most of us, it's much, much easier than it was for Adam and Eve. Today, for less than an hour of work at minimum wage, you can buy a loaf of bread at Randall's or Kroger's. So maybe we're inching towards that ideal future world of Olam Haba. All right, I know, it doesn't seem messianic these days, but we can have hope anyway. But getting back to our blessing over bread, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, what are we to make of it? Can we find some deeper meaning in the words for the world that we actually live in today? In the Torah portion that we read this week are instructions for building the traveling sanctuary, the tent of meeting that would represent God's presence among the Israelites. Lots of details are given about the materials that are supposed to be used and how it's supposed to be exactly constructed. It's an architect's dream. There are 3 furnishings inside the sanctuary that I want to mention tonight. The first is the 7-branched lamp made of gold, symbolized over there on the right, your right, my left, that used to burn olive oil. And as you know, it looks a lot like a tree. It's actually the way I used to draw trees when I was in kindergarten, symmetric branches and a stick in the middle. Still how I draw trees because I'm artistically challenged. In the Torah, it says that the lamp's branches are decorated with almond blossoms. Why almond blossoms? Well, according to one interpretation, the almond tree is the first tree that blooms in the early spring in Israel. In fact, Tu B'Shvat, the holiday we just celebrated, comes around this time of year because that's when almond trees start to bloom. It's literally a rebirth day for trees. And if almond trees are the first to bloom, the first to come back to life, then maybe the lamp is supposed to be an almond tree, and maybe it therefore represents the tree of life from the Garden of Eden. Is that possible? Well, let's look at the second item in the sanctuary, the Ark of the Covenant. That's the golden box that contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments. It was placed in the Holy of Holies, the holiest room in the entire sanctuary. And on the cover of that box, as we all know, were two golden angels facing each other. But the Bible has lots of different kinds of angels. There are seraphim, fiery angels. There are ophanim, wheel-like angels. I'm not sure what they're supposed to look like. And chayot hakodesh, holy animal angels. And then there are cheruvim, cherubs. Not the cherubs of medieval art, the little baby boys with wings flying in the heavens. Some more fearsome creatures with human, animal, and bird-like appearances. These angels that are crafted out of gold on the cover of the ark were cherubs. And those angels appear in only one other place in the entire Torah. When God expels Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, he places two cherubs to guard the entrance to the garden, and he gives them a fiery sword, a lightsaber, to protect the entrance to the Garden of Eden. So cherubs are guarding the Garden of Eden, and now they're guarding the Ten Commandments. That means that two of the furnishings in the sanctuary are reminding us of the Garden of Eden, the lamp and the ark. And now for the third piece, a golden table. It has 12 shelves, and on each shelf every week the priests were supposed to put a loaf of bread. 12 loaves of bread symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. But why bread? Perhaps again this reminds us of the Garden of Eden, where the bread was ready baked and sitting on a table ready to eat. The third item of furniture in the sanctuary is therefore also a reminder of the Garden of Eden. It's astonishing. It would seem that the sanctuary is supposed to symbolize the Garden of Eden. And why not? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve seemed to be able to encounter God uninhibited. They talked to God, and God talked to them. The sanctuary was now the place where Moses would talk to God, and the Israelites would experience God's presence among them. At the beginning of this week's Torah portion, God tells Moses, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." Let them make a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them, just like God dwelled with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And of course, the temple in Jerusalem, both the first temple and the second temple, were modeled after this sanctuary built by the Israelites in Moses' time. And now all synagogues for Jews all around the world are modeled after the temple, which is why we have that depiction of the lamp over there and over here on the walls. And we also have the ark, not housing the Ten Commandments, but our Torah scrolls. They're all symbols of creation, the way the world was supposed to be. So that blessing that we recite so often by rote without thinking about it all, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the blessing is actually packed with multiple meanings. First, as we sit down to eat our Shabbat meal this evening, the challah reminds us of creation and the Garden of Eden, where bread was ready baked. Second, it reminds us that even though today we have to work to make bread, God still provides us with the raw materials: wheat, eggs, maybe cocoa beans so we can put chocolate chips in. And third, it reminds us that we are God's partners in creating the world today, the world as it actually is. We take the gifts that God gives us, including the wisdom and creativity to invent new things, and we turn the raw materials into something even better. Who wants to chew on a stalk of wheat? But challah with chocolate chips. Now that is a taste of Olam Haba, the Messianic times. Finally, the blessing reminds us of the sanctuary. The priests would offer sacrifices to God at that sanctuary, and most of the meat was sacrificed and then barbecued and eaten by the priests themselves. It was holy food, and one had to be in a state of ritual purity to eat it. They had to bathe and wash their hands. Our own Shabbat tables are symbols of the sanctuary, and the challah bread is symbolic of the sacrifice, which is why there's a custom to sprinkle salt on challah, because the sacrifices were salted. And it's why we ritually wash our hands before we eat it. By celebrating the Sabbath or at a meal in our homes, we're performing a holy act. We're elevating the simple animal act of nourishing our bodies into a spiritual act that nourishes our souls. So as we say the Hamotzi tonight, this evening, let's remember that creation is a gift from God, and we are blessed to enjoy God's bounty. Shabbat Shalom.